Gen Z is statistically the most educated, diverse, and queer generation. And I think that this show obviously depicts that very well in a very authentic way through all of these different lenses.
When I was about 15, I came out to my parents in a letter home from summer camp, and I was kind of going through this moment in my realizing that I was queer era where I was kind of just thinking about how I saw so few representations of queer joy on screen. I felt like there was a lot of representation of queer pain and queer suffering and stories about tortured queer people, and I really just wanted to see queer people happy on screen somewhere.
Zelda also was coming home with these stories from her school about what her Rainbow Alliance, which was their GSA, looked like, and the stories were so gripping, and they were just crazily funny, and also sometimes very, very poignant. And she would also talk about this guy in her school who was student body president, but he was also head of the Rainbow Alliance, and he would wear high heels to school. And there was just something in the image and these stories that was God, this would be an incredible world for a television show, having a Gen Z creator there at every moment, guiding us all, made us sort of put this kind of really beautiful lens on Gen Z and say, yeah, all teenagers of every generation, they're screwed up and flawed and make terrible, terrible mistakes. But this generation is pretty damn inspirational. And yes, Gen Z, please go save our world. We need you.
It is really amazing, the support that I've had, especially from our network, from HBO Max. They've been so incredibly supportive, and everyone on set was always really supportive. I mean, that kind of amazing support can't stop anxiety and imposter syndrome and all the things that your brain tells you. And once I kind of realized that my voice was actually really right for this show in particular, I kind of was just a little bit I'm gonna do this and keep working on this. I just tried to let go of all the anxiety that I had surrounding work and success and all of that.
One of the great blessings of being able to work on this show that has such an amazing ensemble of characters is that you have so many queer characters in a show. And I think that's something that I was missing, because there have certainly been incredible queer characters on screen and in TV shows, but oftentimes it's sort of the one character, maybe they're the lead, oftentimes they're the best friend. And I think, to be able to have all of these characters, to have characters, like Chester and Nathan and Delilah at the forefront of this show was really, in its way, kind of a little revolutionary. And I think so oftentimes you see queer characters and it's well, then their storyline has to be about coming out, or they get bullied, or in some way they're trying to come to terms with their sexuality. And what was refreshing here was, yes, that's true of some of our characters, but for some of them, it's just they're queer and they're living their life, and we get to see them as kind of wholly born people besides their sexuality, which I think is refreshing.
I'd never really seen the kind of authentic bisexual representation, especially for a male character, until Generation, and that was something that I always thought was really beautiful about the character of Nathan. Generation is really fascinating because kind of teeter on these lines of joy and tragedy.
Generation was genuinely the first time I had seen myself represented on screen, and the first time I saw it, I just sobbed. I could not handle how tangible the emotions were being portrayed through all of these lenses of all of these different characters. Every single one of those scenes, giving birth in the ball bathroom, being in the coven, all of the crazy scenes we got to shoot were just the biggest learning opportunities I've ever had in my life. In my personal life, I feel like I kind of grew up on this set. I, just got out of high school and jumped right in, and I grew up in a conservative community that didn't really hold space for me as a queer individual, and I felt like I found that home with this casting crew, and I'm so grateful.
I definitely think that, having queer filmmakers creates a kind of an authentic and queer gaze. And I think part of that is in sort of creating the subjectivity of, these filming moments and, making sure that there are always sort of queer people, behind the camera, the DPs, the kind of the ADs, the producers, that they're always sort of there and kind of informing it. One of the things we tried to preserve kind of in the vision of the show was this inside out feel. Because it's a show that's co-created by a teenager, we really wanted to sort of in the realization and the visualization to feel like it was being authored, from the inside out and not kind of looked at objectively. So that sort of defined a lot of the way that we created the visual language for the show, but it also meant that we wanted to really focus on some of these very, very beautifully intimate moments. And so there are these kind of moments where we step a little bit out of time and you have these long lenses and people look directly into the lens. And what they are meant to do is to put you into these characters' minds so that when you see Greta looking at Riley or you see Nathan looking at Chester, you just feel really caught up in them. For these very intimate scenes, we had a phenomenal intimacy coordinator, Rachel Flesher, who really embraced the ethos of the show. And what we wanted to make sure was that this scenes that included sexuality were always motivated by character and that they felt true to life to what it's like to have sexual encounters when you're a teenager. And so often those encounters are like not that polished, and they take place in rooms that are too bright or they're too fast or things happen that are uncomfortable or awkward. And we really wanted to kind of preserve that in these scenes because we all felt like, the cast of Zelda, we didn't want scenes to feel like gratuitous or titillating. We wanted them to feel real and authentic. So Rachel would work with us and she had these unbelievable observations about, how to do it. And if this, she talked to the actors and say, if you breathe this way or you curl your toes, this will make it seem more realistic. And it really, really helped to create that sense of authenticity.
In block 2, a little bit, the second half of our first season, we start to kind of explore mental health a little bit more, and I really think that that's a really interesting theme that I would love to continue to explore more with some of our other characters potentially in potential future episodes. I think that's an issue that's really, really important to a lot of members of Gen Z, and I think that Gen Z is pretty open about topics of mental health, which I think is amazing.
I think we also want to jump into class as well and explore that, between some of the different characters and the different socioeconomic backgrounds that they come from. I think we'd like to increase our trans characters in the high school setting. We obviously have, some incredible characters who are the adults, but I think we'd like to make sure that we have trans heroes in our school as well.
I think the religious aspect of Nathan's upbringing was always really fascinating to me, and how that could possibly play into just I would imagine, growing up in that, there's still all of these preconceived notions that you have in your head just growing up around that and surrounded by that all the time. And so I think that'd be kind of something interesting to see Nathan grapple with.
I'm interested to see how Delilah deals with her friendships with people and how her relationship with a certain someone will affect her relationships with her friends. I think in the finale, a lot of loose ends are tied up, but a lot of ties are cut off. And so I think everybody's going to be freaking out a little bit.
Yeah, it's just a roller coaster from start to finish. Nathan is just going through it for it. I mean, Nathan's always going through it, to be fair, but in this episode in particular, just yeah, a lot of stuff, a lot of things.
It's definitely one of those episodes where you have to pay attention to a lot of things that are going on at once, which is exciting.
Yes. I think they're going to react a lot. It's definitely there's quite a bit packed in there, and I think fans will be elated and freaked out and sad and dying for more.